When my husband said we should move in with his father just for a little while, I nodded without thinking. After all, the old man had just lost his wife, and helping him cope felt like the right thing to do. I told myself it would only be temporary. I told myself it would be easy. But I didn't expect the silence in that house to get under my skin. I didn't expect to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of a clock that hadn't been wound in months. I didn't expect the smell of old furniture and faded memories to follow me through every hallway. I didn't expect his presence, quiet, heavy, to feel so comforting. Or so dangerously familiar. The day I caught myself watching him in the garden longer than necessary, something inside me shifted. It was so subtle, so quiet, I barely noticed. But it was real. And I didn't tell anyone. Not even myself. My husband thought I was just tired. Just being helpful. He didn't see the way I paused at the top of the stairs when I heard his father's footsteps. He didn't notice the extra time I took pouring tea into a second cup. And when I did finally admit to myself what I was feeling, it was already too late. Because 3 months ago, I crossed a line I can never uncross. A moment that started with kindness and ended in something else entirely. And now, I don't know how to take it back. But let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how everything really happened. Before I share the truth I've buried so deeply for so long, leave a comment with where you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever held a secret so heavy it changed the course of your life forever? We moved in on a Wednesday. The house was smaller than I remembered, older, darker. The hallway smelled like closed windows and long-forgotten perfume. My husband said it would only be for a few months, just until his father could get back on his feet. He said the old man needed us. I nodded. I said yes. Because what else could I say? At first, I tried to make myself useful. I unpacked the suitcases, filled the drawers, found a place for our toiletries in the shared bathroom. I kept myself busy with dishes and laundry and cleaning things that probably hadn't been touched in years. His father mostly stayed in his room or sat on the back porch, silent. His grief wasn't loud. It was in the way he stirred his coffee without drinking it. The way he stared into the garden like he was waiting for someone to return. My husband went back to work the following Monday. He threw himself into meetings, calls, and late nights at the office. I stayed behind. In this house. In this quiet. With his father. We barely spoke in the beginning. Just the basics, would you like some tea, or do you need anything from the store? But there was something about the way he looked at me. Not inappropriate. Not suggestive. Just observant. Like he was remembering something. Or trying to. I started noticing things. His wedding ring was still on his finger. He still set the table for two. He still checked the mailbox every day, even though he never got any mail. I wanted to help him, to bring some life back into the space. I opened the windows during the day, let the air move through the rooms. I added fresh flowers to the kitchen table. I made soup even though he barely touched it. One afternoon, I found a photograph tucked between 2 books in the living room. It was old, creased and faded. His wife, I assumed. Young, smiling, holding a baby I didn't recognize. I slid it back without a word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water and saw him sitting alone in the dark kitchen, the soft glow from the oven clock casting faint light on his face. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I still hear her sometimes, he said quietly. In the hallway. In the bedroom. Sometimes I forget she's gone. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, holding my glass, feeling like I was intruding. I wanted to leave. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I'm sorry. And he just nodded. In the days that followed, he began to emerge more. Sitting outside in the afternoons. Reading the paper. Asking me about my day. It was nothing. And everything. One morning, as I folded laundry in the living room, he came in to get coffee. He paused at the doorway, watching me. I felt it, his gaze, the weight of it on my back. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said. "The way you move. The way you touch things." I froze. I didn't look at him. I didn't know what to do with that. I just kept folding. When I told my husband about the comment later that night, he shrugged. "He's just lonely," he said. "Ignore it." But I couldn't. I didn't. A few days later, I found myself sitting beside him on the porch in the early evening. We didn't talk much. Just watched the trees sway in the wind. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was thick. Full. He offered me a blanket when the air grew cooler. His fingers brushed mine. It was nothing. It was everything. That night, I dreamed of walking through the house barefoot, the floors creaking beneath me. I opened doors that weren't mine. Touched things I shouldn't have. When I woke, I was breathless. I tried to push it down. I told myself I was imagining things. I reminded myself of who I was, the wife, a caretaker, someone with boundaries. But boundaries blur when no one else is watching. The next week, my husband left on a business trip. "Just 3 days," he said. "Back by Friday." The first night alone in the house with his father felt like holding my breath underwater. I moved quietly, cooked dinner for 2, cleaned up after. He thanked me. Said I didn't have to do all this. But I did. Because it gave me something to hold on to. Before bed, I passed by the study and saw the door slightly open. He was inside, looking at something in a photo album. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. But my steps slowed. The second night, we shared tea in the kitchen. Nothing unusual. Nothing to write home about. But his hand rested near mine on the table. So close I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. We didn't speak much. Just silence. Deep and full. By the third morning, I woke up feeling like something had already changed, though I couldn't name what. I went through the motions, breakfast, laundry, watering the plants. But my body moved differently. Slower. More aware. When my husband called that afternoon, I let it ring twice before picking up. I listened to him talk about hotel Wi-Fi and meetings. I smiled at the right moments. I said I missed him. But I didn't say I was afraid. Not of him. Of myself. That night, I stood at the window after dinner, watching the garden, the wind stirring the leaves. I heard his footsteps behind me but didn't turn. I knew it was him. And I knew something was coming. But not what. Not yet. And not soon enough. The third morning after my husband left, I found myself lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary, wiping down a counter that was already clean. The morning light filtered through the window, catching the dust in the air, and everything felt unnaturally still. I could hear him in the next room, his father, moving slowly, the sound of drawers opening and closing. I knew his routine by now. I had begun to notice every pattern in this house, as if the rhythm of it was replacing my own. I told myself to leave the kitchen, to go upstairs and fold laundry, or check emails, or do anything but wait. But my feet stayed planted. I stood there, cloth in hand, staring at nothing, until he finally entered. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked to the kettle, filled it, turned it on. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was anticipatory. Like something was building. Like we were both pretending we didn't already know the shape of what was coming. "I can make us some tea," I said, too brightly, too quickly. He looked at me, and something in his expression shifted. Not a smile. Not surprise. Just acknowledgement. "That would be nice." I poured the water, added the tea bags, placed the cups on the table with a steadiness I didn't feel. He sat across from me, watching. Not staring. Not intruding. But not casual either. For a while, we didn't speak. We just sipped. I kept my eyes on the window behind him, where the garden swayed in the breeze, and he kept his eyes on me. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was low. Measured. "I don't mean to make things difficult." I looked at him then. His hands rested on the table, large and weathered, veins pronounced beneath thin skin. They looked like hands that had held grief for too long. "You're not," I said. "It's not you." His brow furrowed. "Then what is it?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Or I knew too well and couldn't bear to say it aloud. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't even afraid of my husband. I was afraid of what I was becoming here. Afraid of the comfort I had found in a place I wasn't supposed to feel anything. I stood up suddenly. "I should check the laundry." He nodded once, slowly. I turned and walked away, but I felt his eyes on my back the entire time. That afternoon, I went for a walk, something I hadn't done since we moved in. I needed air. Space. Something outside this house. I wandered through the neighborhood aimlessly, past houses with trimmed lawns and wind chimes. Everyone else's life looked so normal from the outside. So untouched. By the time I returned, the sun was already beginning to dip. I saw him on the porch, sitting in that same chair he always did, reading. As I passed by to go inside, he looked up. "You walked far?" "Just needed to clear my head," I replied. He nodded and didn't ask anything more. That evening, we shared dinner again, quiet, unremarkable. But the tension had changed. It was no longer the uncomfortable kind. It was thick with awareness, with the weight of things unspoken. Every glance, every pause, every accidental brush of fingers, it all crackled. After we finished eating, I took our plates to the sink. He stood beside me without saying a word and began drying as I washed. It was a small thing. Mundane. But I felt the warmth of him beside me as though he were standing too close, even though he wasn't. When we finished, I turned to put the towel away, and that's when it happened. He looked at me, not with hesitation, not with confusion, but with quiet certainty, and I didn't step back. We were standing too close. The air between us was too still. His eyes held mine, and my breath caught in my throat. We kissed. It was gentle. Almost careful. But no less real. I stepped back first. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We stood there, not touching, barely breathing. Then I turned and left the room. Upstairs, I locked the bathroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the tub, head in hands. My skin felt electric. My body betrayed me with its tremble. My mind raced in 100 directions at once. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel guilt, not in the way I expected. I felt cracked open. Exposed. Like something I'd buried long ago had clawed its way back to the surface. Later, lying in bed beside an empty pillow where my husband usually slept, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment over and over. The way he looked at me. The way I didn't resist. The way I didn't want to. The house was silent. The night stretched long. I didn't sleep. The next morning came wrapped in silence. I woke earlier than usual, the house still cloaked in that soft, uncertain light that settles before sunrise. The sheets were tangled around my legs, and I felt the tension in my shoulders before I even moved. My mouth was dry, my thoughts already spinning. There was no forgetting what had happened. Not even for a second. I went downstairs without brushing my hair, barefoot on the cold steps, expecting, hoping, not to see him. But there he was, already in the kitchen, back to me, pouring coffee. He didn't turn when I entered. He simply reached for a second mug and filled it, placing it on the table without a word. I hesitated in the doorway. Everything in me screamed to go back upstairs, to avoid this moment. But I walked in, sat down, and wrapped my hands around the cup like I needed it to stay grounded. The silence between us was no longer neutral. It pulsed. Every movement, every breath felt significant. I tried to act normal, lifting the cup to my lips, but my hands betrayed me with the slightest tremble. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady, as though it had been rehearsed. I shouldn't have, last night. That wasn't fair to you. I didn't respond. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee, watching it disappear into the air. Fairness wasn't the word. Nothing about this was fair, to him, to me, to my husband. But it had happened. And it wasn't just a mistake. It was something more complicated. More dangerous. I think we should just go back to normal, I said eventually, though the words didn't feel true. They felt like something I was supposed to say. Something a responsible person would say. He nodded, slowly. If that's what you want. But even as he said it, we both knew it was a lie. Whatever line we'd crossed, there was no uncrossing it now. That day passed in slow motion. I kept busy, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, reorganizing drawers, wiping the same counter 3 times. My husband called just after noon. His voice sounded distant, distracted. I might be delayed, he said. Meeting rescheduled. Might not make it home until Sunday. I told him that was fine. I told him we were managing. He asked how his father was. I said, quiet, which was the truth. After the call, I stood in the hallway with the phone still pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. Sunday. That was 2 more days. I wanted to feel relieved that I had more time to fix whatever this was. Instead, I felt unsettled. Like I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite define. That evening, he didn't come down for dinner. I made a plate anyway and left it on the table. When I passed by the living room later, I saw him sitting in the dark again, his back straight, hands resting on his knees. I didn't go in. I didn't speak. But I felt the pull again, stronger now, more insistent. I shut the door quietly and went upstairs. Lying in bed, I tried to replay the last few days from the beginning, to make sense of it. It had all happened so gradually. A look. A moment. A shift in breath. And yet, now it felt like I was standing in a completely different life than the one I'd entered with. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came in flashes, disjointed dreams, glimpses of the garden, of hands reaching for mine, of voices muffled behind closed doors. The next day, I woke with a headache. The sky outside was gray, heavy with the threat of rain. I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the wind tapping at the windows. Eventually, I got up, pulled on a sweater, and went downstairs. He was already there, again. This time sitting at the table, reading the paper. He looked up when I entered, then back down, saying nothing. The tension between us had cooled slightly, replaced by something quieter, more resigned. We went through the motions of the day like ghosts, 2 people sharing space but not time. He took his usual walk in the garden, while I vacuumed the rugs upstairs. I avoided eye contact. Avoided shared rooms. I needed to give myself distance, even if I didn't know what for. But it wasn't sustainable. That kind of avoidance never is. That evening, I found myself standing outside on the porch, arms crossed, watching the sky shift as the first drops of rain began to fall. The air was thick with moisture, the smell of wet earth rising around me. He came out quietly, standing just beside me, not too close, but close enough. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said. Not as an excuse, not even as an apology, just a fact. "I know," I replied. My voice was softer than I intended. Tired. We stood like that for a while, the rain falling harder, the porch roof creaking above us. It would have been easier if we'd fought, if there had been yelling, blame, something sharp to push against. But there wasn't. Only this quiet ache between us, and the knowledge that we had both crossed into something irreversible. "I think we need to pretend it didn't happen," I said finally. He looked at me, his eyes darker in the low light. "Can you?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. That night, I avoided the kitchen. I went straight to bed, turned off the light, pulled the covers to my chin. But sleep stayed far away. I listened to the rain, to the creak of floorboards, to my own breathing. I wondered what he was doing. If he was pacing. If he was awake, thinking the same things. I wondered if he regretted it. I wondered if I did. But deep down, under all the guilt and confusion, there was something else. Something I didn't want to name yet. Something dangerous. Something that still wasn't done. The morning after the rain, the house felt colder. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the way I moved through it now, more aware of my footsteps, of the way the walls seemed to echo in places they hadn't before. I wrapped myself in a cardigan and tried to focus on the ordinary, tidying the hallway, watering the plants by the kitchen window, making toast I didn't eat. Everything I touched felt distant, as if I was watching myself from across the room. He didn't come down for breakfast, and I didn't go looking for him. The previous night's conversation lingered in the air, heavy and unfinished. I had said we should pretend. That we could somehow go back. But I hadn't really believed it. Mid-morning, I stood by the window and watched the garden. The ground was soaked, leaves weighed down by the rain, petals sagging. The air outside was thick, but I needed it. I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, the wood damp beneath my feet. The sky was still heavy, the air smelling of moss and silence. He was already there. I hadn't seen him approach. He stood at the edge of the yard, looking toward the trees as if listening for something. I froze in the doorway, uncertain if I should retreat or walk forward. In the end, I stayed where I was. He turned and saw me. No expression crossed his face, just a small nod. I returned it, equally neutral, and turned to sit on the far end of the porch. We stayed like that, him in the yard, me in the corner, two people occupying the same space but not crossing into each other's. It should have brought relief. It didn't. Later, inside, I busied myself with laundry. Folding shirts, matching socks, neatly stacking towels as if I could somehow smooth the chaos inside me through careful creases and folded corners. My mind, however, refused to be quiet. It replayed that moment in the kitchen over and over, the stillness, the weight of his presence, the way I hadn't pulled away. When I passed his room with a fresh stack of linen, the door was slightly ajar. For a moment, I paused. I could hear the quiet rustle of pages turning. He was reading. I moved on. By mid-afternoon, I tried to convince myself that what had happened wasn't significant. That it was simply two people grieving in proximity, mistaking comfort for something else. But there was a lie in that logic. and I felt it each time I walked past him, each time his shadow passed over mine in silence. My husband called again. I let it ring once before answering. "Still on track to come home Sunday," he said, his voice clipped. "Might be late." "That's fine," I replied. I kept my tone steady, calm. But inside, something flinched. I wasn't ready for him to return. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. Not when I didn't know what I felt anymore. He asked how his father was. I paused before saying, "Quiet." It was always the easiest answer. Always true. That evening, we ate dinner together again, silently, deliberately. I placed the plates down, and he thanked me with a nod. We avoided each other's eyes. The air between us wasn't angry or resentful. It was worse. It was understanding. Understanding that the line hadn't just been crossed. It had been redrawn somewhere else entirely. After dinner, I stood at the sink, staring down at the soapy water, letting it numb my hands. I didn't hear him approach. But I felt it, the familiar shift in the air. "You don't have to stay here," he said behind me. I turned slowly. His arms were crossed. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed more. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "At least not tonight." He nodded. "I just wanted you to know that you have a choice." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. The idea of choice felt foreign. When had I last chosen something solely for myself? Later that night, I sat alone on the porch again. The rain had stopped, but the air still clung to everything like damp fabric. I listened to the creak of the trees, the occasional rustle of wind through wet leaves. That was when I saw her. A neighbor, walking her dog across the street. She glanced at the house, then at me, and her gaze lingered just a second too long. There was nothing accusatory in her eyes, no judgment. Just curiosity. Observation. But that was enough. That single look, that brief awareness from the outside, pierced through the bubble we'd been living in. Until now, everything had been contained within these walls. Quiet. Controlled. But now there was a crack, however small. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a weight. In the hallway, I paused. His door was closed. A soft light flickered beneath the crack. I didn't knock. I didn't speak. I just stood there for a moment, heart heavy, before retreating to my room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. The silence of the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt like pressure. Like something was building toward a breaking point. I thought about what he'd said, that I didn't have to stay. That I had a choice. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know how to go forward without unraveling everything. And I didn't know if I could go back without pretending to be someone I no longer recognized. Sleep didn't come. Not really. Only shallow dips into memory and thought. My body stayed tense. My breath shallow. Something had shifted again that day. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. But it was irreversible. And I could feel it taking root. The next morning, I woke up to an almost unbearable quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest, makes it hard to breathe. I had slept through most of the night, but the dreams had been restless. I kept waking up, the sheets tangled around me like a physical manifestation of my own confusion. When I finally opened my eyes, the day felt too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I lay there for a while, just staring at the ceiling, letting my thoughts settle. I thought about the kiss. The touch. The way my body had responded, despite everything. I couldn't deny it, no matter how much I wanted to. It wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a shift. A moment that could never be erased. I got up slowly, pushing aside the blankets. The room felt colder now. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, now drenched in sunlight. The ground still glistened from the rain, the air fresh but heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Downstairs, I moved through the house mechanically. I prepared breakfast, though my stomach churned at the thought of eating. I poured coffee into a mug, watched the steam curl upward, and felt the heat of it against my hand. I kept waiting for him to come down, for the moment we would have to face each other, but it didn't come. The house stayed silent, almost too silent. Finally, I heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate. He was coming down. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to behave. Part of me wanted to run, to leave this place and never look back, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not without understanding why I had let myself get here. He entered the kitchen without looking at me at first, his eyes focused on the counter, on the cup of coffee I had prepared. He didn't say anything at first. Just reached for the cup, his fingers brushing mine in the process. It wasn't intentional, but it felt like an electric shock, sending a wave of heat through me. "Morning," he said softly, his voice low and controlled. "Morning," I replied, forcing myself to look up at him, to not let my eyes betray me. He sipped his coffee, and I did the same, the silence stretching between us. My heart beat faster than it should have, the thudding a constant reminder of what had happened. I couldn't just pretend it didn't matter. I couldn't erase the way he made me feel, even if I wanted to. "I thought we could talk," he said, breaking the silence, his words heavy. I set my coffee down, my fingers trembling just enough for him to notice. I couldn't meet his eyes, and I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I knew what I had done, what I was feeling, and I didn't want him to see the truth on my face. "What about?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual. He looked at me then, his eyes steady, almost searching. "About last night." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain it, not to him. Not to myself. "I don't want things to be strange between us," he continued. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." I nodded, though the words he spoke felt like they belonged to someone else. A part of me wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That I was the one who had crossed a line. But I couldn't. Not yet. "We don't have to make it awkward," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "We can go back to the way things were." He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "I don't think we can." I blinked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "There's something between us now," he said, his tone softer than before. "Something we can't ignore." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him we could go back to pretending, to living in the same house as if nothing had changed. But I knew deep down that it wasn't possible. Not anymore. "We can't," I said, my words feeling more like a question than a statement. He stepped closer, just a little. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne. His presence seemed to fill the space around us, making it hard to breathe. "I don't want to pretend either," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking. "But I can't keep living like this." Neither could I. We stood there in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on both of us. It was as if everything I had tried to avoid had come rushing to the surface all at once, leaving me gasping for air. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating air in the room, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't move. Finally, I looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since the kiss. His eyes were filled with something I couldn't name, something raw, something real. I didn't know what to do with it. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. Neither do I, he replied, his voice filled with an honesty I hadn't expected. But we can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words sink in like a weight in my chest. We couldn't go back. We couldn't pretend anymore. What had happened between us wasn't just a mistake. It was something deeper, something more. And now, there was no undoing it. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we would survive this, if our family would survive this. But I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same. And that scared me more than anything else. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything, couldn't focus on the mundane tasks that had once been my routine. The walls of the house felt smaller, tighter, and the silence between us grew thicker. I couldn't escape it. Neither of us could. When night fell, I went to bed early, though sleep didn't come. The bed was too big without him beside me. The emptiness of the room seemed to echo the emptiness inside me. I closed my eyes and tried to block out the thoughts racing through my mind. But they wouldn't stop. They never stopped. I didn't know how much longer I could live like this. The days following our conversation felt like I was walking through water, everything was slower, heavier, and harder to navigate. My movements felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't sure what they were doing. I couldn't find my rhythm again. I couldn't get back to the version of myself that had walked into this house just a few weeks ago, believing it was going to be temporary, believing that everything would be fine. The weight of the unspoken hung between us like a dense fog. The silence felt heavier than ever, pressing against my chest every time we crossed paths. I couldn't look at him without remembering what had happened, without seeing the way his lips had felt on mine. I couldn't even breathe without feeling the consequences of it all. But we kept moving through the motions, didn't we? Like it was just another day. Like nothing had changed. And maybe that's what scared me most, how easy it was to pretend, how easy it was to slip into this strange routine where nothing was ever said, but everything was known. My husband's call that evening, saying he'd be home the next day, made my stomach twist. He hadn't asked about his father. He hadn't asked about me. I didn't know what he expected, but I wasn't sure I could pretend to be the wife he'd left behind anymore. I wasn't sure I could go back to the life I had before. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of me, untouched. The quiet in the house had become oppressive, and I couldn't help but listen for every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge. I had spent so many nights in this room with him, but tonight it felt different. It felt too loud in the absence of everything we had been avoiding. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. "You're still awake," he said softly. He didn't come any closer, just leaned against the frame, watching me. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice strained. I couldn't look at him directly, couldn't stand to meet his eyes. Not now. Not after everything. He stepped closer, but there was a caution in his movements, like he wasn't sure if I would let him. His presence seemed to fill the space between us, making it even harder to breathe. I wanted to push it all away. I wanted to shove him out of the room, to retreat into myself and forget everything that had happened. But I couldn't. I didn't. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "About pretending it didn't happen." I didn't respond, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "You can't just ignore it," he added, taking another step closer, standing by the table now, just a few feet from me. "I can't. We can't." I wanted to tell him that I was trying. That I was doing my best to pretend it never happened. But the truth was, I couldn't. Not when every moment felt charged with something unsaid, with everything hanging in the balance. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, almost to myself. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to him or to the fear that had become a constant presence inside me. I don't either, he said softly, his voice thick with something I couldn't place. But I don't think we can keep living like this. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I had to move. I had to get out of that room, away from the intensity of the moment. Away from the weight of his words. I turned to walk out, but his voice stopped me. You can't keep running from this, he said, his words gentle but firm. I stopped in the doorway, my back to him. I don't know how to face it, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know what to do anymore. There was a long silence behind me before he spoke again, his tone quieter. Neither do I. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I wasn't sure I could look at him again without seeing that moment, the kiss, the thing that had changed everything. The night stretched on after that, stretching into hours that felt like years. I stayed in my room, the silence between us growing, filling every corner of the house with its weight. My husband was coming home tomorrow, but I wasn't sure if that meant anything anymore. I wasn't sure if there was any going back. The next morning came too quickly. I awoke to the sound of the front door opening and closing, my heart in my throat. I had known it was coming. I had known he would be home today, but it didn't make it easier. I stayed in bed for a while, listening to the sounds of him downstairs, his voice, faintly, as he spoke to his father. The house felt different now, as if every creak of the floorboards and every step they took together was a reminder of what had happened, of what I had done. I got up slowly, trying to prepare myself for the inevitable. For the moment when he would walk into the room, expecting me to be the woman he left behind, expecting me to fit into a life I wasn't sure I belonged in anymore. But when he came into the room, I was surprised by how calm he looked. His eyes didn't look angry. They didn't look disappointed. They just looked tired. And I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. Are you okay? He asked, his voice quiet, as if he wasn't sure if I wanted him to ask. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I wasn't sure if I was okay. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be okay again. I'm sorry, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I shouldn't have stayed away so long. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know how to comfort him when I couldn't even comfort myself. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, a small movement but enough to make the distance between us feel enormous. I don't know what's happening between us, he said, his voice thick. But I want to figure it out. Together. I didn't know if I could do that. I didn't know if I could go back to being his wife, to pretending I hadn't crossed that line. I didn't know if I could keep living like this, in this house, with this unspoken tension between us. But the words I wanted to say got stuck in my throat, and all I could do was nod again, my heart beating too loudly in my chest. There was nothing more to say. Nothing more to do. Not yet. The house seemed to shrink with each passing day, the walls pressing in tighter, the space growing smaller and more suffocating with every glance. It was impossible to ignore the weight of everything that had happened between us, the quiet understanding, the distance, the shared silences that no longer felt comfortable. Every step I took, every room I entered, felt like I was being followed by the truth of it all. I didn't know what I expected when my husband came home. Maybe I thought the air would clear, that everything would return to normal when he walked through the door. But the moment he entered, I realized how much had already changed. The house, the routine, even the smell of his cologne, it was all different now. I could hear him downstairs, speaking softly with his father, their voices low and deliberate. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the undercurrent of something that wasn't quite right. Something unspoken, like a tension that hovered in the room, refusing to settle. I had been avoiding him. It wasn't intentional at first, but now it felt like I couldn't stand to be close to him. I couldn't face him. The distance between us had become something physical, something I could almost touch. My body reacted without my permission, my heart would race every time I heard his footsteps approach. I could feel the warmth of his presence before I even saw him, and it made my skin prickle with discomfort. And yet, I couldn't completely shut him out. I couldn't ignore him. He was my husband. And in some way, I was still his wife. But what did that even mean anymore? That night, we sat down for dinner, the three of us. His father didn't speak much, but his presence was like a shadow over the table. It was hard to ignore the silence that filled the room. Every word seemed to carry weight, every glance seemed to linger a little too long. It was as though we were all aware of the elephant in the room, but none of us could bring ourselves to acknowledge it. When dinner ended, we all retreated to our separate corners of the house. My husband went upstairs to check his emails, and his father went to his study. I stayed in the living room, not quite knowing what to do with myself. I felt like I was trapped in this house, in this routine, with no way out. After a while, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, my husband. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. He was standing there, just looking at me, as though he was waiting for me to say something. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice thick. "I know I've been distant. I don't know how to fix this." I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. "It's not just you," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix it either." He took a step closer, but I didn't move. My body felt heavy, rooted to the spot. It felt like we were both standing on the edge of something neither of us wanted to confront, but that we both knew was there. "Do you still love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to answer, to tell him the truth, but the truth felt like a weight too heavy to bear. Did I still love him? In some way, yes. But it wasn't the same. It couldn't be. Not after everything that had happened. "I don't know," I whispered. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, as though the weight of my words had crushed him. I felt it too, the weight of it all pressing down on me, suffocating me. For a long moment, we just stood there, not speaking, not moving. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't even know if it could be fixed. Finally, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the quiet house. I stayed there, frozen, my mind spinning with thoughts I couldn't control. I didn't know what was happening between us. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what was going to happen to this family, to this house. But I knew one thing, things could never go back to the way they were. We had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept myself busy cleaning, cooking, doing the things I had always done. But nothing felt the same. Everything felt off, like I was going through the motions but not really living. I avoided my husband as much as I could, but it was impossible to completely ignore him. He was always there, in the house, in the rooms, in the spaces between us. We spoke less and less. We ate dinner in silence, only exchanging words when absolutely necessary. The tension between us was palpable, a thick cloud that hung over everything. It was like living in a house of glass, fragile, brittle, waiting to shatter. His father had been quieter too. I hadn't heard him speak much in the past few days, and I couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same weight that hung in the air. We were all living in this suspended state, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do next. One afternoon, as I was walking through the hallway, I passed his father's room. The door was ajar, and I heard the faint sound of pages turning. I paused for a moment, not knowing why. There was something about the sound, the quiet rhythm of it, that pulled me in. I knocked softly, though I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed the door open just a crack, and there he was, sitting in his chair, his back to me, a book open in his lap. "I'm sorry," I said before I even thought about it. "I just wanted to check on you." He looked up, his face unreadable, but his eyes were softer than I expected. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Just thinking." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. "Okay," I said, turning to leave. "I'll let you be." Before I could walk away, he spoke again. "You're trying to fix something that can't be fixed, you know." I froze, not sure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, putting the book down and looking at me. "You can't go back to what it was. Neither of you can. But that doesn't mean it's over. It just means you have to figure out what's next." I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if there was a next step. But I knew that I couldn't keep pretending, not anymore. "Thank you," I said softly, and left the room before I could say anything else. That night, I sat in the living room again, staring out the window, my thoughts racing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going to happen next. But I knew one thing for sure, whatever came next, I couldn't face it alone. I needed to figure out how to talk to my husband, how to face the truth of what had happened, and how to find some way forward. But for now, all I could do was sit in the quiet of the house, waiting for the next moment, the next shift. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The days felt like they were stretching out endlessly. I woke up each morning with the same heaviness in my chest, the same uncertainty weighing me down. My thoughts were tangled, like the blankets I pulled off each morning. I was trying to move, to act as though nothing had changed, but it was becoming harder and harder to fool myself. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. I kept myself busy with small tasks, folding laundry, cleaning the kitchen, organizing things that didn't need organizing. It was easier to focus on something tangible than to deal with the shifting emotions inside me. But no matter how much I tried, the silence between us was deafening. He was always there, in the background of the house, his presence so close yet unreachable. His father stayed mostly in his study, retreating into his own world, as though he, too, was trying to ignore the tension that had seeped into every corner of the house. That night, I sat in the living room, staring out the window at the darkened garden. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the world was waiting for something. I had barely spoken to my husband since he came back. It wasn't that we fought, it was worse. We had simply stopped talking, stopped connecting, stopped pretending. I didn't hear him enter the room, but I felt him there, standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady but quiet, as though he was unsure of how to begin. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. He took a step closer, and I could hear the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his weight. "I don't want to live like this," he continued. "I can't pretend anymore. Not with you. Not with him." I turned slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. There was pain in his eyes, but there was something else, too. Resignation. He had already made up his mind, and I knew that whatever he was about to say would change everything. "I don't know what's happening between us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't keep ignoring it. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." I felt a lump form in my throat. He was right. We couldn't keep pretending. We couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything I had done. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know what to do either." He took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. I think we need to talk about it. We need to face it. If we're going to move forward, we have to stop pretending it didn't happen. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. He was right. We couldn't ignore it any longer. But I didn't know if I was ready to face it. I didn't know if I could handle the truth of what had happened. I'm scared, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed. He stepped closer, his voice softening. We can figure it out. But we have to be honest with each other. No more lies. No more pretending. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could fix this. But I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even possible. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice shaking. But I don't know if we can come back from this. He didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, watching me with that same quiet intensity. Finally, he spoke. I don't know if we can either, he said quietly. But we won't know until we try. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. I wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other, but I wasn't sure if that was even possible anymore. I don't know if I can forgive myself, I whispered, barely able to speak the words. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. But we have to start somewhere. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, and I wiped them away quickly, feeling embarrassed by my weakness. But he didn't pull away. He stayed there, just a few inches from me, and for the first time in days, I felt something that wasn't dread or fear. It was a tiny thread of hope, fragile and fleeting, but still there. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady. We'll take it one step at a time. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe him. I didn't know how we were going to get through this. I didn't know if we would make it. But I knew one thing, we couldn't keep living like this. We had to face it. Together. That night, I went to bed with a sense of heaviness that hadn't been there before. It wasn't a feeling of finality, but of something starting. Something that had been buried under layers of silence and avoidance, something that had to be unearthed. And even though it terrified me, I knew it was the only way forward. But I also knew that no matter how much we tried to fix things, there was no going back. What had happened between us couldn't be undone. The damage was done. The lines were drawn, and now we had to figure out where to go from here. And so, we started. One step at a time. One word at a time. But the truth was, I didn't know where we were headed. And I didn't know if we could get back to where we had been. All I knew was that I had to try. For him. For me. For us. But somewhere, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe some things were just meant to break. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the broken pieces could still fit together in ways we didn't expect. The house felt heavier than it ever had, even in the early days after his mother's death. Maybe because now the grief wasn't about someone who was gone, it was about everything that was still here, but changed. It lingered in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the creak of the stairs. In the way my husband glanced at me and then looked away. In the way I avoided the porch altogether. In the way his father kept his study door closed, as if to create his own version of silence. We were all orbiting one another, careful not to collide. But every step I took felt like I was brushing against the edge of something too fragile to name. That morning, I stood in the kitchen alone, watching the kettle come to a slow boil. I wasn't hungry, but I needed the routine. My hands moved without intention, opening cupboards, pouring tea, placing a spoon beside a cup I wouldn't drink from. I kept thinking about the conversation I'd had with my husband the night before, the moment I'd let the words "I don't know if we can come back from this" slip out of my mouth like they hadn't been waiting to escape. He had taken it quietly. He hadn't fought. He hadn't asked for more than I could give. And maybe that hurt even more, his acceptance. His sadness that didn't come with shouting or accusations. It just sat there, like a stone in the center of the room, unmoving. Later that day, I heard my husband on the phone in the hallway. His voice was soft, serious. I didn't hear the words, but the tone told me everything. He was speaking to someone at work, extending something, delaying something. He was staying longer. And I didn't ask why. I didn't have the energy to pretend I didn't know. He didn't come into the room afterward. I think we both knew we didn't have the strength to look each other in the eye. I went upstairs and stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom. My reflection startled me. I looked older. Tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. I traced the lines around my mouth with my fingertips, wondering when they had deepened. When I had started to look like someone else. I changed my clothes 3 times that afternoon. Not because I had anywhere to go, just because I couldn't settle. Every outfit felt like a mask that didn't fit right. In the end, I pulled on an old cardigan and sat by the window, staring out at the overgrown garden, wondering how I had gotten so far from myself. In the late afternoon, I walked out into the backyard. The grass was still wet in patches, and the smell of earth clung to the soles of my shoes. I moved slowly, dragging my fingers along the top of the wooden fence. It had warped with time, weathered and cracked in places. I understood it more than I should have. He came outside not long after. His father. I hadn't spoken to him directly in 2 days. Not since that quiet moment in the doorway of his study, when he told me I couldn't fix something that wasn't meant to be repaired. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood at a distance, watching me from beneath the shade of the tree near the edge of the yard. I didn't look back. I didn't have the words. Not anymore. Eventually, I heard his footsteps approach. I didn't move. "I'm sorry," he said, the words barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes. "For what?" I asked, my voice flat. "Tired." "For all of it," he said after a long pause. "For letting something happen that never should have. For making it harder for you." I didn't respond right away. My hands were clenched inside the sleeves of my sweater, my fingers cold despite the lingering sun. "We both let it happen," I said finally. He nodded, though I didn't see it. I felt it. That subtle shift in the air when someone accepts responsibility. "It didn't start as anything," I continued. "But then it became everything. And now I don't know how to breathe without carrying it." His silence was louder than words. "I've hurt him," I said. "I've changed everything. And I don't even know if I regret it. That's the worst part." I turned to look at him then, expecting him to look away. But he didn't. His eyes met mine and held. There was no anger there. No desperation. Only the same sadness that lived in me. "You were the first person to really see me in a long time," I said. "And I needed that. But I don't know if needing something justifies breaking something else." He looked down at the ground, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "Maybe it doesn't." We stood in silence for a while after that, both of us suspended in something neither of us could name. A pause between the wreckage and whatever might come next. When I went back inside, my husband was in the kitchen. He had made tea. 2 cups. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure if I should cross it. He noticed me and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit with me," he said. I did. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there, each of us with our own thoughts, our own weight to carry. The tea grew cold between us. But still, we didn't leave. I saw you outside, he said at last. I know, I replied. Another silence stretched, but it felt different. Not heavy. Just necessary. Did you love him? He asked suddenly, not accusing, just asking. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to lie. And I didn't want to hurt him with the truth. But I also didn't want to keep pretending. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe not in the way you think. But I needed something. And for a moment, I thought I'd found it in him. He looked down at his hands. I watched the way his fingers curled against the edge of the mug. Okay, he said. That was it. No anger. No accusations. Just, okay. It should have broken me, but instead, it broke something open. The wall between us, maybe. Or maybe just the illusion that we could go back. I stood up and moved to the sink, my back to him. What do we do now? I asked, barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer. Because maybe there was no answer. Not yet. But I felt, somehow, that the fact we were even sitting in the same room was a beginning. A fractured, fragile beginning. But a beginning nonetheless. The days after that conversation passed with a strange, heavy calm. We didn't speak much. There were no outbursts, no angry confrontations. Instead, we moved around each other like we were both walking on fragile ground, careful not to step too hard, not to break something further than it already was. My husband didn't ask me what had happened. He didn't demand an explanation. I think he knew that even if I gave him one, it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the hurt, the confusion, the way everything had shifted under the weight of a single moment. He seemed to accept that. And in a way, I was grateful for that. For the space he gave me to breathe, to think, to try and make sense of it all. His father, too, kept to his silence. I saw him less now, retreating even further into his study, his presence more like a shadow in the house. The distance between us all felt like a vast chasm. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I wasn't sure if we were avoiding each other or just resigned to the reality that we could no longer pretend. One afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty cup of tea. My hands were still, resting on the edge of the table. I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular, just the rhythm of my breathing, the way my pulse seemed to echo in the stillness. I felt like I was waiting for something to happen, for the next shoe to drop, for the decision to be made. It had been days since I'd spoken to him directly. I hadn't even really looked at him. There were moments when I'd catch him in the corner of my vision, standing in the hallway or sitting in his chair by the window, and it would make my stomach tighten, like I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. I didn't know what he was thinking, and I didn't want to know. I didn't know what I was thinking either. I just knew that the silence between us was too much to bear. That afternoon, the door to the study opened. His father stepped into the hallway, his face drawn, his steps slow. He looked at me, his eyes soft, but there was something unspoken between us, something we both knew but never said aloud. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I looked up at him, startled. I hadn't expected him to speak. Not like this. "For what?" I asked, my voice hoarse. It wasn't a question I thought I would ask. It wasn't even a question I knew the answer to. But it came out anyway. He hesitated for a moment, and I could see the weight of the past few days on him. It was more than just his own grief, it was everything that had happened between us. Between me and his son. And he knew it. He had seen it all unfold. And somehow, that made everything even harder to face. "For all of it," he said, finally. For letting this happen. For not seeing what was right in front of me. I didn't know what to say to that. How could I? How could I even begin to explain that the thing that had happened wasn't just some mistake? It wasn't something that could be explained away in one sentence, one conversation, one apology. It wasn't just your fault, I said, my voice trembling. It was mine too. I'm just as responsible. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew the truth of it. For a long time, we just stood there. The quiet between us was thick, but somehow, in that moment, it didn't feel oppressive. It just felt necessary. Like the world needed to pause, just for a while, to let everything sink in. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. I think we both have to learn to live with what happened. And we have to make our peace with it. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that even meant. Make peace with it. Could I ever make peace with this? Could any of us? I wasn't sure. But I knew we had no other choice. We couldn't undo the past. We could only move forward. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. You'll figure it out, he said. You and him. But just know, whatever happens, you're not alone in this. And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the quiet of the house once more. The words he left behind echoed in my mind. You're not alone in this. I wasn't sure if he meant it. Or if it was just something he said to make himself feel better. But somehow, the weight of them felt like a small comfort. Maybe it was because I needed to hear it. Maybe because, despite everything, I still wasn't sure if I could face what came next alone. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, lost in thought. The sound of my husband's footsteps eventually broke through the silence, and I knew he was walking toward me. I didn't turn around immediately. I didn't know if I was ready for this moment yet. But when I finally did, I found him standing there in the doorway, looking at me with something soft in his eyes. Not anger. Not resentment. Just something I couldn't name. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what happened, he said, his voice low but steady. But I'm willing to try. I think that's all we can do now. Try. I couldn't speak at first. The lump in my throat was too big, too heavy. I swallowed hard, trying to push past it. I don't know if I can forgive myself either, I whispered. He nodded, his expression softening just slightly. But we can try, right? And somehow, even though the words didn't fix everything, they meant something. They meant that, despite the damage, there was still something worth saving. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was something. I didn't know how long it would take to rebuild what had been broken. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were. But I did know one thing, this wasn't the end. Not yet. We were still here, still standing. And for now, that was enough. I stood up, crossing the room to where he stood, and without saying anything else, I reached for his hand. For the first time in days, we touched. And for a brief moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through this. Together. But I also knew that we weren't the same. We couldn't be. And maybe, in the end, that was the only thing we needed to accept.